Доброго дня, мене звати Гліб Вишлінський, виконавчий директор Центру економічної
Good
стратегії.
afternoon. My
Вітаю
name is
вас
Gleb
на
Vyshlinsky. I'm the
підсумковому
executive director
щомісячному
of the
обговоренні
Center of Economic
української
Strategy.
економіки
Let
під
me
час
welcome you to
повномасштабного
our
російського
monthly
вторгнення. І
review of the
сьогодні у нас
economy,
тема
of the Ukraine's economy
максимальне,
during
власне,
full-scale
наближення до
invasion. And
тих
today, our topic is as
ключових
close as
питань, які
possible for
виникають
those
під
key
час
questions that are
повномасштабної
arising
війни.
during the
Це
full-scale war.
виробництво зброї.
That is the production of weapons.
Але подивитися на
But
нього ми хочемо
to look at
сьогодні
it,
не з
we
точки
want to look
зору
at it not from the
того,
point of view
як
of how
забезпечити
to provide
зброєю фронт, що
the
очевидно
front
є
with the
найважливішим, але це є трохи не сфера нашої
weapons, which is more
спеціалізації,
important, but
але
it's not
сфера
the
нашої
area of our
спеціалізації це
specialization, but the area of our
зрозуміти,
specialization
який
is to
є вплив
understand what is the
розвитку
impact of the
оборонно-промислового
development of the
комплексу
defense
на
sector
українську
on the
економіку, і
Ukrainian
наскільки
economy,
це,
and to which
власне,
extent this is
допомагає
exactly helping
економічній
the
активності і
economic
який
activity
вплив
of the
це
country and
має
which
на
impact
різні
it has
елементи
on various
економічного розвитку
elements of
та на
economic
діяльність інших
development
секторів.
and on the activity of other sectors.
Отже, кілька
So,
організаційних
a few
моментів.
housekeeping
Англійський
issues.
переклад,
The English
як
translation is
завжди,
available as
у
usual
нас є внизу. Можете
simultaneous.
переключатися.
It
English
is
translation is
on the bottom
available
of your screen.
below. Також
Also,
прошу,
please,
якщо у вас
in case you
виникатимуть
have any
питання до
questions
як нашої
to
команди, так
how
і
our
до
team,
тих
to our team, as well as to
експертів, які
those
братимуть участь у
experts that
панельній
would participate in
дискусії,
the panel
особливо
discussion,
якщо це є якісь
especially
технічні
in case
питання,
these are some
то
technical
дуже
issues.
прошу
I
писати
would
їх в
really love to
Q&A,
ask you to write
зазвичай у
them in
спікера,
Q&A.
якщо він не з
Very
телефону, є
often, in
можливість
case the speaker has
відповісти на ці технічні
the
питання,
telephone, they
власне,
are able to
текстом,
answer these technical
особливо якщо у
questions
нас дискусія
using
і
text,
буде жвавою, і не
especially
буде
in
вистачати
case our
часу.
discussion is quite
А,
lively and
а
we'll miss some
зараз
time.
ми почнемо,
So
як
now we
завжди,
will,
з
as usual,
загального
start off
огляду
from
на
the general
ситуацію
review
в
of the
економіці,
situation
власне,
in the
в
economy
липні.
in
Те, що ми
July,
робимо щомісяця.
something that we are doing on a
І
monthly
першою
basis.
буде Саша
And the first will
Мироненко,
be Oleksandra
яка
Myronenko,
відповідає
who
у
will
нас за
he is
бюджетну
responsible for
політику.
the
І,
budget
власне,
policy.
Саша, розкажи,
And
що у нас
basically, Sasha will
відбувалося
explain
з
to us what was
бюджетною
happening
стійкістю, що,
with the
власне, теж
budget
є вкрай
resilience,
важливим під час
which is
війни.
also
Саша,
very
прошу.
important during the war.
Так,
Sasha,
дякую,
the floor is
Глібе.
yours.
Ми почнемо
Thank
з
you, Gleb.
фіскального
And let's
сектору.
start
Чи
from the
видно мій
fiscal
екран?
sector.
Скажіть,
Can you
будь
see my
ласка.
screen?
Все добре.
Yes, everything is
Так,
fine.
чудово. І
Great.
почнемо з дохідної частини.
So let's start from
Отже,
the
в
revenue
липні
part. So
цього
in
року
July this year,
відбулось збереження загального зростання податкових
the
надходжень,
general
податків до загального
revenues
фонду
kept
державного бюджету.
increasing.
В липні надійшло
The
148
taxes
мільйонів
arrived in the
траншів
amount of
гривень, що на
148 billion hryvnia,
32%
which
більше
is
порівняно з
32% more
липнем минулого
compared
року.
with July of
Імпортне
previous year.
ПДВ традиційно
The imported
залишається одним з
VAT
найбільших
traditionally remains one of the
джерел
biggest
податкових
sources
надходжень,
of tax
забезпечивши
revenues,
близько
having
третини
provided around
загальних
one-third
податкових
of the
надходжень.
total
І у
revenues
липні
from the
ці
tax.
надходження досягли
And in
42
July,
мільярдів
these
гривень,
revenues
збільшившись на
reached
28%
27
рік за
billion
роком,
hryvnia,
що, в принципі,
having
підтверджується
increased
великим
27% year to
обсягом
year,
імпорту.
which is
Водночас слід
confirmed by the big
зазначити, що попри
amount
зростання
of
абсолютних
imports.
показників
Although
СВА,
there are
на
absolute
перше
figures
півріччя,
growing,
саме на
the
перші 6
plan
місяців
for the
не було
first
виконано на
half a year
4%.
is
Це
not fulfilled by
зменшення
4%.
на 10 мільярдів.
That is
Це пов'язано,
less
зокрема,
by
із
10 billion.
збільшенням
This is connected with
пільгового
the
імпорту,
increase of
частка
the
якого
preferential imports, the share of
за
which in July
січень-липень цього року
between
становила 24% проти 14%
January
у
and July
2024 році,
was
що зменшило загальну
14%,
частку
which decreased
оподаткованого
the
імпорту. Що
overall share
стосується
of the
внутрішнього
taxed
ПДВ,
imports. When it comes to
він
internal
показав стабільні
VAT,
результати,
it has
27
shown very
мільярдів
stable
гривень
result,
із
27
перевиконанням
billion
плану
hryvnia,
на
with
перше
plus
півріччя на
44%
7%. Акцизні
year to year.
збори значне
This is above
зростання
target by 7%. The excise
продемонстрували
tax,
акцизи. 27
the
мільярдів
excise
гривень,
tax
що
is
на
also
34% більше, ніж за той
totaled
самий період
almost
минулого року,
27
та
billion,
на
which is
10%
10%
більше
more
відносно червня цього року.
months
Це
to the
зумовлено
month of June.
насамперед збільшенням
And this is
імпорту акцизних товарів,
because
зокрема
of the
тютюнових
increased import
виробів,
of the
також
excise goods, especially
покращенням
tobacco,
контролю над обігом
and
підакцизних
as well
товарів.
as
Що
improving the control
стосується
over the excise
податків
goods.
на
When
доходи
it
та
comes to
прибутки,
PAT
то податок
taxes,
ПДФО
PAT
демонструє
revenues
зростання на
has shown
63% рік до року з
increase
перевиконанням
63%
плану
year
на
to year
перше
with
півріччя, що
14% above
зумовлено,
plan,
зокрема,
which is
зростання
also
номінальних
explained
заробітних
by
плат.
the growth of the
І
nominal
доходи
wages.
від рентних
And the
плат – це, що
revenues from
показує
the rent,
негативний тренд,
whatever shows
починаючи з
the negative
початку
trend
повномасштабного
starting from the
вторгнення.
beginning of the
В липні
full-scale invasion.
23-го
This trend
року ці
continues.
доходи
In July
за
2025,
доходи від
these
ренти
revenues from
становили 3,3
subsoil
мільярди
rent
гривень,
constituted
що на
3.3 billion
28%
hryvnia,
менше,
which
ніж
is
в
less
липні минулого
by
року. І основною
28%
причиною
versus
тут
July previous
залишається
year. And
менший
the main
обсяг
reason remains
платежів
the
за видобуток
less
природного
volume of
газу
payments
через
for
вищі
the
ціни.
production of natural gas
Переходимо
because
до
of lower
видатків.
prices. And let's come to the
В червні
expenditures of the
25-го
budget.
року загальні
In
видатки державного
July
бюджету залишились на
2025,
рівні травня.
the
432 мільярди
general
в червні порівняно з
expenditures remained at the
432
level of
мільярдами в
May.
травні, що
They
на
were
11% більше порівняно з
442
аналогічним
billion
періодом
compared
минулого
to
року.
430 billion in
Які
May.
ключові зміни?
What are the
Червень
key changes?
характеризувався таким
June was
певним
characterized
перерозподілом видатків
as a
між
certain
категоріями.
redistribution of
Власне,
taxes
воєнні
between various
видатки за
categories.
рахунок внутрішніх
The
джерел
military
бюджету
expenditures,
просто
thanks to the
зменшились на
internal
10%
source
в
of budget,
порівнянні з
they
травнем,
decreased
а при
compared to
цьому
May. But
допомога,
this,
оборонна
the
допомога, яка
international
приходить у
military
вигляді, фізичному
assistance
вигляді
that
зброї,
comes as physical
вона
weapons,
навпаки зросла.
it has
І
grown.
загалом воєнні
And in
видатки
general,
у
the
першій
military
половині
taxes in
цього
the first
року
half of
на
this year
35% були
are
вищими, ніж за
35%
аналогічний
more
період минулого року.
than the same
Проте
period of
навіть при
last year,
цьому план
although
на
the plan
перше
for the
півріччя не
first
було
half a year
повністю
was
виконаний.
not fully
Що
fulfilled.
стосується соціальних
When it
видатків, то
comes to
спостерігається
social
стійка
taxes,
тенденція до зниження
social
видатків на
expenditures,
сектор
we can
соціального
see a stable
забезпечення. В червні
tendency
вони
of
скоротились на
decrease. In
2%
June,
порівняно з
they
травнем,
decreased by
та на
2% compared to
14%
May
порівняно з
and
червнем
by
минулого року.
14%
І
compared to June
загалом соціальні
2024.
видатки
And
у
in
першій
general,
половині
the
25-го
social
року на 11% менші, ніж за
expenditures
той самий
in the
період
first half of
минулого року.
2025 are 11% lower
Найбільше
than the
зростання,
first
яке ми
half of
бачимо у
2024.
червні,
And the largest increase that we saw
демонструвала
in June
трансфер місцевих
was
бюджетів
shown
на
in the
50%,
transfers
що
of local
є
budgets.
типовою
That's
сезональною
plus 50%, which
особливістю
is
цього типу
quite
видатків.
a typical
І
seasonal
також збільшились витрати
thing.
на відновлення
Also, there's been
та
more
гуманітарну допомогу.
expenses on
Зокрема,
humanitarian
Укрзалізниця в
assistance.
червні отримала понад
Ukrzaliznytsia
1
in
мільярд
June
гривень
received
для
more than 1 billion
забезпечення
hryvnia
безперебійних
to
перевезень в
provide
зони
the
бойових дій в рамках більшої
continuous
програми, а
transportation in the
також
facility zone
збільшились
in the
видатки
framework
на
of the bigger
ремонт
program,
та
and more
експлуатацію відновлених
expenditures
батарей.
were
Також
put
важливо
on
зазначити, що в
repairs
кінці
of
липня Верховна Рада
damaged
підтримала
roads.
внесення змін до
In the
державного
end of
бюджету, тим
July,
самим
Verkhovna
збільшивши
Rada
оборонний
supported
бюджет цього
changes to
року
the
на
budget, having
412 мільярдів гривень.
increased
Також ми
the
раніше
budget of
хотіли
this year by
збільшити на 449 мільярдів.
412
Решта
billion
цих
hryvnia.
видатків є
So the rest of
необоронними, і
these
їх також можуть, ці зміни
expenditures
також
are not
можуть
defense
сприяти
related,
вже
and these
наступного
changes can be
тижня.
already
На цьому у мене все і
adopted
дуже
in
дякую.
the end of next week. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Так, дякую, Сашо.
Yes, thank you, Oleksandra.
Продовжуємо з
Let's
огляду
continue
економічної
with the review of the
ситуації.
economic
Далі
situation.
Лазар
Then
Левченко, наш
Yeleazar
економіст,
Levchenko, our economist,
власне,
will take the floor,
буде покрито зараз.
and
Зараз ми поговоримо про
we will now talk
ситуацію в
about the situation
монетарній
in
політиці.
the monetary
Пане
policy
Myronenko, і
at the foreign exchange market.
Дякую, Глібе.
Thank you, Hlib.
Перейдімо до монетарного сектору.
Yeah, let's come to the
Цього липня інфляція
sector.
продовжила падати і сягнула
This year, inflation continues to
14,1%
fall. It has reached
порівняно з липнем
14.1%
попереднього року.
compared to July
І
previous
також
year,
вперше
and
за
also for the
тривалий
first time
час
since quite
скоротилася
a long
місяць до
time,
місяця.
it has
В
decreased from
основному
month to
через
month,
скорочення
mostly
цін,
through
зростання
decreasing
цін
prices,
у
actually growth of the prices
овочах.
in
Також ми
vegetables.
спостерігаємо продовження
There was actually a sharp drop in vegetable prices. We also continue to see a significant decline
жорсткості монетарної політики,
in
в
the
основному через
rigidity of
покращення
monetary
початок
policy
маркетингового сезону,
by
кращі
improved
врожаї,
marketing season,
також
better harvests,
тиск
and
зовнішніх цін.
less pressure of the external prices. Also, NBU, in the end of last month, reviewed their forecast for inflation, and now it's
Лазаре,
9.7%.
щось в тебе з мікрофоном.
Something with your
Якщо ти
microphone,
щось закриваєш або
in
віддалився,
case
то, будь
you're
ласка,
closing something or you have moved away
щось
from the
непогано
microphone,
чути.
please, because
Можливо,
you're not
стало
really well heard.
тихіше.
Погано все ще.
Таке враження, ніби щось відходить. А ну-ка, ще раз
Seems like
скажи.
something is moving.
Зараз краще.
Now it's better. Yeah, now it's better.
Добре.
Okay.
НБУ переглянув свій прогноз
So NBU has
до
reconsidered their
вищу
forecast
сторону до
in the
9%
higher
під кінець
direction to
року і
9.7%
переніс
until the end of the year and
прогноз
has
досягнення до таргету
postponed
5% з
its
2026
forecast
до
of
2027
reaching
року.
its
Також
5% target
НБУ
from
залишив
26 to
у
27.
липні
Also, the NBU has
ставку,
kept in
облікову
July
ставку
the
незмінною
key
на
policy rate
15,5%
unchanged at
через
15.5%
вищу, ніж
because of the
очікувалось раніше
higher than
інфляцію.
expected inflation.
Також НБУ
Also, the
прогнозує
NBU forecasts
перехід до
the transfer
зниження
to
облікової ставки
lowering
ближче до
of
кінця
key
року.
rate somewhere around the end of the year.
Щодо резервів,
In terms of
то
the
вони
reserves,
у липні
they are
скоротилися на
down in July by 4.5%
4,5%
to reach 43 billion American dollars.
Однак це ще є
Nevertheless,
достатньо
this is
малорівним.
quite enough.
НБУ також прогнозує
NBU also forecasts
підвищення до
the
кінця року
increase
своїх
until the
резервів
end of the year of their
54
reserves
мільярдів
to some
гривень
54
за
billion
рахунок міжнародної
dollars at the
допомоги
expense of the
і
international
подальше падіння до
assistance,
45
and the
мільярдів у
further
26-му
drop in 26
через
until 45
невизначеність
billion
щодо
because of some
міжнародної допомоги.
uncertainty related to the
Щодо
international
обмінного
assistance.
курсу,
In terms
то,
of the exchange
як ми
rate,
можемо
as we
спостерігати,
can see,
за
the
останні
fluctuations were
півроку
quite moderate
він був
within last half a year. The
курс
rate
гривні до
was
долара був доволі
Hryvnia
стабільним.
dollar rate was quite
Це
stable.
завдяки
So
з
that
одного
is
боку
thanks, on the one hand,
операціям
to the
НБУ
transactions of
і з іншого
NBU,
боку політиці Сполучених
and
Штатів,
on the other
що
hand,
глобально
because of the
послабило
policy of the United
долар.
States,
І ми це
which
бачимо
has
також
globally weakened the dollar. And we can
зростання
see
курсу
that
гривні
with the
до євро,
growth of USD
що також, власне,
euro
пояснюється
rate,
цією ж
which is also
причиною
explained by the
послаблення
same
пари
reason of
євро-долар.
weakening the
Перейдімо
dollar
до
versus
міжнародної
euro.
торгівлі
Let's
також.
come to foreign trade
Ми
now.
продовжуємо,
We are
бачимо продовження
continuing, and we
тренду
can see
на
the continuation of the trend
підвищення
to
дефіциту
increase the
торгового
deficit
балансу.
of the trade balance for
Водночас
Ukraine.
український
At the same
експорт
time, the
у
Ukrainian exports
липні
in July
підвищився
rose
на 9,2%
9.2%
порівняно з
year over
липнем
year.
2024 року,
That is the July
що
of previous year,
частково
which has
компенсувало
partially
слабкий
offset
початок року
a weaker start in
експорту.
the year. In terms
Також,
of
якщо ми
exports,
порівнюємо
also in
перші
case
7
we
місяців
compare the first 7
2025
months of
року, то
2025,
експорт
we can
на
say
1,5%
that
нижче такого самого
the
періоду
export
2024
remains
року.
1.5% below the same period in
Водночас імпорт
2024. At the
продовжує
same
стрімке
time,
зростання,
import
що
continues to
послаблює
sharply grow,
торговий
which
баланс
weakens the trade
і
balance,
зріс на
and has gone
18,7%
up
рік до року.
to
І тому
18.7%
ми
with
бачимо
year over
також,
year.
що
And we also
імпорт,
see
по
that the
суті,
imports,
сягнув
in essence,
рівнів
has reached
перед
the
вторгненням.
levels of the pre-invasion
Тобто,
level.
враховуючи
So
стагнування
taking into
експорту
account the
та
stagnation of exports
зростання
and
імпорту,
growth of imports,
торговий
the
баланс
trade
не
balance
очікується
continues
на відновлення
to
торгового
hit
балансу.
its negative peaks, and
Ми
no
також
recovery
розглянули
of the trade
секторальні
balance is
зміни,
expected in the
які
near
відбулися
future. We have
протягом
also looked at the sectoral changes
повномасштабного вторгнення.
that happened during the full-scale invasion.
І загалом
And in general,
шок війни, по
the
суті,
war-related
зруйнував близько
shocks
третини
has ruined some one-third
експортної
of the export
спроможності
capacity
України,
of
і
Ukraine,
ці
and these
спроможності, цей експорт
capacities,
зруйнувався дуже нерівномірно за секторами. В
it's not
першу
very
чергу
uniform in sectors. In the first place, it has
видобувних індустрій,
affected
тобто це
mining industries,
металургія, це
metallurgical,
видобування, це шахтарство,
mining,
де зосереджено 90%
quarrying,
втрат
where we
нашого
have
експорту
90% of
протягом
export
цієї
losses in
великої
those
війни.
sectors during the big war.
Також можна сказати, що
Also, we
ці
can
зміни
say that these
переважно
changes are
невідновлювані, оскільки вони
mostly
пов'язані з
unrecoverable
фізичними
because they are
об'єктами
connected with
та
some
ресурсами,
physical
які
objects
були
that have
або
been
окуповано, або
destroyed,
зруйновані.
either occupied
І
or destroyed.
водночас
And at
інші
the same time,
категорії, інші
other
індустрії
categories,
також
other
стикаються з
industries
новими
are also
викликами,
struggling with some
будь
new
то
challenges,
зміни
be it
клімату,
the climate change,
шоки
terms
умов
of trade
торгівлі чи
shocks,
атаки
infrastructure
Росії на
attacks
нашу інфраструктуру.
on
Тому
our
експортна
infrastructure. Yeah,
сторона
that's why the
торгового
export side of
балансу,
the trade
ймовірно,
balance
не
is unlikely to
покращуватиметься в
contribute
майбутньому.
positively anytime soon
Щодо
in the near
імпорту,
future.
то
In terms of
імпорт
imports,
багато в чому
imports to a great
підвищився
extent
за рахунок
has
наших
increased
об'єктивних потреб
thanks to our
у веденні
objective
війни,
needs in
як
conducting
на
war,
фронті, так і
both
у
at the
тилу.
front and in the rear.
Багато в чому зростання
To a
імпорту
great
це
extent, the growth of
машинерія,
imports is
транспорт і зброя.
machinery, transport, and the
Також
arms.
зростання
Also, the growth of imports of machinery is connected with the active losses of energy capacities, which need to be recovered by procurement of relevant equipment, including transformers, generators, electronic modules. At the same time, we see the growth of some big categories of other, which to a great extent are connected, that there was a revision of statistic of balance payments that has included postal transfers under 150 euro, which are currently untaxed. Passing the floor back to you. Thank you, Lazar. Now the last block of our standard review. And the first block, the special review, that's this analysis of the situation in Ukrainian sectors. And what is happening in the defense complex. We will find out how we call it nowadays. I would like to ask Nataliia Kolesnichenko. She's our new senior economist who is responsible for the area, the situation in business, and the policy support in politics. Welcome to all listeners and viewers about the development of the situation in various sectors. The situation in energy has been quite stable this year. Those destructions that we had last year have brought significant deficit to electric energy, but this year the situation is quite sustainable. We don't see any cut-offs, and Ukrenergo is not switching off even companies. That's why all of it supports our economic activity, and taking into account the situation is stable. The second month in a row, the export exceeds than import. We can export electric energy. From other interesting news of this sector is that New York has increased price caps for electric energy in peak hours and short segments of the market from 9,000 hryvnia for 1 megawatt hour until 15,000 for megawatt hour. And let me remind you that pertains to the commercial supplies that is not up to the companies, so this does not impact inflation. And the idea is to improve the imports from the EU to make sure that electric energies would be able, it should also be able to sell them in the internal market. And within 10 days of August, the imports of electric energy grew by almost twice, more than twice. That has given Ukrenergo not to switch off industrial users, although the weather is quite hot. Ukraine is continuing its preparation until the winter season. Gas is actively pumped in, more than 800 billion of cubic meters of gas were pumped in. Last year we did not import that much, and as at the beginning of August, the volumes of gas in our facilities, underground storage, has reached record figures. So until the beginning of the 1st of November, our volumes will reach 13.2 billion cubic meters. That's quite a big volume, quite an ambitious objective, but really hope that the government will be able to achieve that. For this, Naftogaz received the EBRD loan for 500 billion euro, but also from Privatbank and from Ukrgazbank. Each of those loans 4.7 billion hryvnia. Naftogaz has also signed a first deal of supplies of Azerbaijani gas. However, Russia has restored attacks on energy infrastructure. In the beginning of August, the Orlivka station was attacked, which is part of this Balkan corridor. The next slide, please. Stable energy situation supports business activity, as I said, and that is also reflected in the business and consumer moods. You can see the monthly index of PMI from the National Bank for the third month in a row, quite stable. Also, quite stable are the expectations of households. They have even improved in July at the expense of that the households are more prone to make some long-term purchases, and they have improved long-term 5-year economic expectations. At the same time, both indexes are lower than their neutral level, which means that the economy is reviving, but very slowly and very moderately. Based on the assessment from the companies, the high costs, lack of staff, as well as deterioration of the security situation limit their quicker recovery, especially in July. It was a very interesting situation in agriculture. In general, this year, there was some preliminary expectation that the weather conditions would be more favorable for the harvest than what we had last year. Nevertheless, it didn't happen as it was prognosed. So, for second year in a row, we have drought that has significantly impacted the harvest. Last year, the drought was in July, and that affected the later cultures, while the early cultures were harvested, and it was quite high. Wheat, barley, and rapeseed were fine. But this year, the overall harvest level for grains and beans is 10% less. It pertains to early cultures, and also by 9% it's less for rapeseed. And the situation is not uniform in various regions. The south and the center are very much suffering from the lack of humidity, and some other regions, like in the west and the northern regions, they demonstrate improving of the harvest productivity in terms of the early cultures, which is somehow going to compensate our losses that we will have in the south. Because of this unstable weather, we have less harvests collected as at the beginning of August. Previous year, we harvested almost all early cultures. This year, these figures are much less. 85% of rapeseed and barley and 72% of wheat have so far been collected. All of this is already taken into account in the updated forecasts. We can expect that what is happening now, that we have more rains, better humidification will improve sunflower and corn harvest, and in general, the harvest and the export of this year will be quite significant. USDA expects that Ukraine will harvest around 22 million tons of wheat, with the export of 15.5 million tons. And in the August report, they even have improved the corn harvest estimates. The previous, they thought it would be 30.5. Now they have improved it to 32 million tons. And the export of corn will be also quite significant at the level of 22.5 million tons. And now let's come to a special topic. It's on the next slide. And one more. So we have decided to look at the role of arms production in the economy of Ukraine. In the first place, I'd like to make a small disclaimer that, of course, in the military times, there are no open data. Actually, there are quite a few of them. We have used exactly the open sources. At the same time, we are thinking that a significant part of data could be classified. That's why our conclusions should be carefully treated. At the same time, we can definitely say that the role of the military sector has significantly grown. This could be traced even how the number of companies have reached who have in their list of economic codes of economic activity at least one a direct military code that pertains to the production of explosive materials, explosive of weapons, and production of military cars and drones and other air-related mechanisms. So, according to the data of Control, the current supply of Ukrainian arms, there are many more private entrepreneurs who are doing these war-related products and using some indirect data. The labor market, the sectoral's role in the labor market has also increased. According to indirect data, the proportion of these enterprises employees in the industry almost doubled between 21 and 25. Again, these are all indirect indicators. In general, the overall number of such employees is not huge in the economy compared to the rest of the labor force. Nevertheless, this growth can be partially explained that we have lost a lot of industrial production. That's why we don't have the employees that could be used at this industrial production, and possibly the employment at the military industries is growing because such employees get a reservation from conscription. So, based on the data of the Ukrainian authorities, the current supply of Ukrainian arms now has reached from 10% in 22 to 40% of the front's needs in 2024. The next slide, please. And the role of the military sector has grown in the sector not because of the number of employees and the number of companies, but also supporting the economic growth. So in case the industry significantly fell in 2022, while now the indicators of direct and indirect sectors where budget orders are funneled, when it comes to industry, they fell not so significantly, but in the upcoming years, 23, 24, and 25, it actually has been quite high. Whereas the state orders can be funneled, I believe it could be funneled also to the food production of footwear, production of clothes, a lot of parts that relate to machine building, that pertains to various electronics, parts of the machines and electronic works, everything you can see on the graph. Based on the data of the Ukrainian government, the volume of production in the defense sector has grown from $3 billion in 2023 all the way to $9 billion in 2024. At the same time, this potential is actually estimated as higher, both by the government and by the production companies. Last year, the potential value of defense production was estimated at $20 billion and is predicted to surge to $35 billion in 2025. We know that the budget has proposed to send 55 billion hryvnia for the development of military productions. Also, according to Dragon Capital, this growth could provide 1/3 of the annual real GDP growth in 2024. So the role of this sector in the economy is quite high. It has significantly grown, and this is really happening in the first place at the expense of financing the budget. And in general, the state budget expenditures are 30% of the GDP. Nevertheless, they are funneled to the payment of the military. Also, there is some money that is sent to the development of industrial military production. At the same time, the defense sector depends on imports. I don't think we have enough manufacturing companies of the full cycle. That leads to the fact that Ukraine is importing not only weapons, but various works, components for the production of weapons. And as a result, we see the imports growing, especially the imports of machine building. At the same time, we can say that although this high imports of our product is in machine building, that's what Lazar said, it pressures on our international reserves. Nevertheless, the assistance from our international partners, although it's not funneled directly to military needs, nevertheless, it has allowed the National Bank to keep down the structural deficit of the foreign currency on the market, and indirectly it also contributes to the development of the military sector. We do understand that this sector is significantly underloaded, while the needs of the military are quite high. It certifies that the budget financing is not enough. That's why it's very important is financing from partners based on the Danish model, creating joint companies, providing financing from EU for various large-scale projects, also at the expense of income from the frozen Russian assets. In my opinion, same as in the conditions of war and after the war, the Ukrainian industrial military complex should continue to stay the governmental priority. I hope our invited guests will introduce us to the rest of the interesting developments in the economy. Thank you, Natalia. We will talk about the state priorities we have today, irrespective of the topic. It's quite complicated, somewhat, not even somewhat, but significantly close, but still very important. We managed to get together an interesting pool of guests who are engaged. I will present in the order that I will give the floor to make sure you would understand. In the first place, I would like to ask Andriy Teliupa, Deputy Minister of Economy, Environment and Agriculture of Ukraine. Andriy is responsible in the ministry, in particular, for the support of economy sectors, support of business, and what is traditionally called the real sector, and which sector is more real than exactly the defense. Followed by Andriy, I would like to ask from the other side, from the side of demand and needs of the Ukraine's defenders, to ask Lyubov Shipovich. Lyuba is the founder of the Dignitas Charitable Foundation. Judging from the landscape and her clothing, I believe Lyuba is somewhat near to the front line. So to look at it from the point of view of the demand and from the point of view of the needs, how exactly, what is the potential of the internal production, I would like to ask Lyuba to do this. And we will have also representatives of 3 associations. Actually, during the last 3 years, we have seen strong associations who are the producers working in the defense sector. In the first place, I would like to ask Anna Zaruba, who is the GR manager of the Association of Private Arms Manufacturers, which is called Tech Forces of Ukraine. Then Valentyna Vedrovska, the colleague of Anna. She is the GR manager of the Ukrainian Council of Defense Industry. And then the summary will be provided by Nataliya Mykolska, executive director at Diia.City United. Maybe they're not so much into defense, but mostly to IT, but a lot of defense producers, high technology producers, they are the participants of Diia.City and the participants of this association. Natalia used to be the deputy head of the Ministry of Economy, deputy of the Ministry of Economy. So let's see, between the current deputy minister and one of the previous deputy ministers, this will be a discussion between them. So Andriy, the question to you, it's exactly about, in the first place, the data and on that feeling that you have at the ministry when you talk with the participants of the market. How do you evaluate the dynamics of the development of this defense sector, or how should we call it in the current conditions? Everything that exactly is thought about by those who say that the economy should be placed on military rails. I don't think this is the proper term. It's coming from the old days, but still the priority of the support of economic development, it's exactly the development of the defense production. So in the first place, how do you see the dynamics, both from the volumes of production, amount of producers, amount of people who are working in this or other sectors, and how exactly government, the Ministry of Economy, and this is already your business, how do you help to develop for those manufacturers who have some military, the ones with whom you're working, and how do you help the defenders? Good afternoon, welcome to everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Yes, everything's fine. Naturally, as Hlib has already mentioned, for the government in general, this area is a priority, and it should remain priority for the upcoming years, irrespective of the situation that we will see at the front, because we all understand that exactly full independence and the successfulness of the country will depend directly on this. Because for us, this industry is not just that we have to provide for ourselves, but it's also about our important political position, because we see the maximum change of moods in Brussels from the point of view of the European Commission, when they see Ukraine really as an important part of their security and defense capacity. And that's why we have to develop this area as much as we can. The Ministry of Economy is not responsible for the development of defense sector, but traditionally this was done by the Ministry of Strategic Industry and the Ministry of Defense, who are working and who are proposing separate programs for the support of these arm producers. But then, as our analysis shows, it's important to remember that these are also the companies that don't have a direct military code. Nevertheless, they can be supported by the government, because all components for the ammunitions, they are produced by general regular companies, and even it's for the better in the framework of the full-scale war, it's very difficult to identify them, because if you have some code of machine building or metal processing, it's difficult to detect you. But exactly, we see that we now have hundreds of companies who are actively participating in this. In case we look at the statistics and the latest changes of GDP, so these companies remain one of the most important to support this industry, and they show growth, economic growth. In case we look at the latest data about tax payments this year, the defense industry is occupying 8% of GDP. In general, it pays around 20% of taxes. So we are seeing that is good taxation, the industry is working, and we actually can see that the growth of this sector is caused by this participation for the dual-use products. And it's important to say that it's not just a term where we are covering up some military production, as it's often mentioned by associations, and we can hear it from our today's speakers. We can definitely have manufacturers who are not loaded enough, and we really hope for the development of the Danish model, and correspondingly, exactly in the framework of the financing, within safe financing, we are also expecting some additional funds. We will also engage for our sector, the development of in Ukraine, but correspondingly, there is an open question about the gradual opening of exports of arms. There are some moves in this direction, and it will all depend on the security situation in Ukraine. But irrespective of that, we can see that those companies that are making drones, they're very much interested to make also other absolutely different products for instance, automobile industry. So we, as the Ministry of Economy, we made a separate special program, the components of the victory. So that is the components that are used for drones and for the robotized platforms to make sure we could engage as much as possible to produce this in Ukraine. That's why we would not need imported and especially Chinese components, because now almost all parts of drones can be produced in Ukraine. The question is more about the cost of production, the cost of scaling up, and how they can compete with the Chinese producers. That's why we can see a very important objective to support Ukrainian producers to make sure they can scale up as much as they can. And for this, we have added a program. In the grants, we have a separate component for the producers of drones and the components, as well as the robotized platforms. So in such a way, we give directly funds from the state using the 80-20 co-financing terms to procure and upgrade of the equipment to make sure that the companies can have the possibility to develop. And we conducted meetings with these companies, and they say that in the first place, they're very much interested in the automobile clusters because Ukraine supplies a significant share of components for production in Germany, and 1/3 of Mercedes, BMWs, and Audi, they say they have Ukrainian parts. That's why we can grow this need. And also, there is a big question which is coming up, and where the Ukrainian market can be, apart from ammunition, and it's the question of strategic autonomy. We're trying to build up, and it will not, we don't want to depend on supplies that are coming through the oceans. It's exactly offshoring, and Ukraine is the key player in their plans. So, making some resume, we as the government see that the overwhelming majority of defense sector, it's the companies that belong to dual-use sector, and they should be a locomotive for the growth of the economy of Ukraine. And in the first place, because we can see from the experience of the previous wars that the military industry, it gives possibility for the development of innovations, civil sector, and those drones that we have seen in the agrarian sector, as well as in other directions. Ukraine is very much in top in terms of robotized platforms. This is the sector that is very much in demand and huge prospects, not only for Ukraine, but also in other parts of the world. Ukraine has to be a part of the single joint EU market and part of the market, defense market. So we believe that the Ukrainian companies will have the markets for sales markets. We will be exporting to various other destinations, and we should put this as a priority, as one of the points for our economy to grow. That's why in the analysis that we are making, we, together with the World Bank, in terms of the economy of the future of Ukraine, so machine building will be a huge priority. Dual use, we have more prospects for the development of Ukraine in the upcoming 10 years, and with the biggest potential for growth in GDP. So we are supporting that as much as we can, and we can see lots of prospects for this. Thanks, Andriy. So in case we summarize, in case I understood you correctly, the programs for the support of proposals from the government, they're to a great extent focused on dual use, on components. At the same time, whatever pertains the production directly of the ammunition, it is very much, it depends very much on the demand, and in the budget, the money that are coming from the Ukrainian budget, as well as something that we are hoping for, it's the cost funds of our international partners. So we have underused capacity that already exists. The question is only in the money. In essence, yes, for the producers of arms, the main demand is to stimulate them via demand, having some very specific orders, as well as the Danish model, which is very important nowadays. And also we have added, as the government, some new instruments of finances using the successful models. With 579, we made 5.7 for the defense sector, and since the resource is limited, the instruments of stimulation are coming for international funds. They are financed not through the budget of Ukraine, but it's via the World Bank and the money of our partners. So when we can't use directly international money for the producers of arms, but we can still use them for the producers of dual use. That's why we are focusing our general economic programs where there is no demand from the defense consumers. So we are trying to support as much as possible the producers through financial and grant initiatives. Many thanks, Andriy. Thank you for joining us today. Lyubov, let's now look from the point of view of one of the biggest foundations that acts as a, so we are perceiving funds as something very important players who are helping people, businesses to direct their resource to support the defense forces of Ukraine. But I do know the foundations in the same way are also very important participants of this innovations chain in Ukrainian defense industry and in the Ukraine defense forces. They are buying first samples, they are supporting with financing the startups, etc., etc. Plus, you directly, you are talking to the military. How do you see the situation now from the point of view of the proposals of the weapons and goods of dual use by Ukrainian producers? Do you see any progress? Do you see any gaps and bottlenecks that should be resolved to make sure better, cheaper weapons and what is necessary for us, for our guys at the work, would reach those brigades with whom you're working? Lyuba, the floor is yours. Welcome, colleagues. It's very sad that you don't have the representatives of the Defense Ministry and the parliamentaries from the Defense Committee, because now I believe we have problem not in financing, but we have mostly organizational and normative problems. It's what Andriy has recollected about dual use. The military don't need dual use. We need single use. We are fighting. We are not using agri drones to harvest, to plant the fields, but the majority of manufacturers are coming into dual use. That's how we play with legislation. There are certain limitations, and we are trying to say that I'm not making kamikaze drones. I'm just making some transportation means that brings something somewhere. And that in reality slows down the development of the military industrial sector, that slows down the procurement. So we are trying to play the market economy in the conditions of war. That's super good in the conditions of peaceful days, when the market economy, when we have demand, we have the offer, but in the conditions of military times, we continue to respond case by case. When the demand is coming, then we are starting to run. Again, in the conditions of these limitations, licenses, etc., etc. In the conditions of the technological war, that should be different. not demand and offer, but the armed forces and the Ministry of Defense should be the ones who should order something that doesn't exist today, something that still doesn't have any demand. A good example is shaheds. We started to receive shaheds in autumn 2022, but when we came up with the ones who could take this shaheds down, it was already back in 2025, so nobody was developing it. But the Ministry of Defense should at that time should have thought, in case this shaheds becomes 1,000 per night, what if we don't have S-300 missiles? What if they are missing? What shall we take? What shall we use to take these down? So the market economy is not working in the conditions of war. Another example is the radio location systems, the electronic warfare systems. You should see it, not visually, but on radars, in order to launch the interceptor. But the production of radars is regulated in Ukraine using the law of the development, and only from the permission of the chief intelligence service you can buy it, which production can be brought up in case the producer would not know whether something will come out or not come out. They should receive a huge number of permits, and this is not really so we can intercept shaheds only when we have radars. In other places we simply don't intercept them because we simply don't see them. That's why even if you have financing, we should talk about the change of legislation or really putting the economy to the military rail, and that is often necessary because the private producer is a private producer. If it's a market economy, the producer can take the investor from China. So part of the technology will come to China. Will China keep it to themselves, or will it transfer to countries which are even more unfriendly than China? But to dictate in the conditions of the market economy to business where they should take the investor, we simply can't. Once again, business can decide, for instance, I'm producing 1,000 anti-shaheds per year. I don't want to do it anymore. I have a small business. I don't want to grow. I have enough money. But for the state, this decision is necessary. And now how does the state acting? Okay, if it's not there, it's not there. We bought what we bought, goodbye. But this is really a critical technology that is so much necessary. In the conditions of the military economy, the state should either buy out this technology, even if they don't want to sell it, it should be expelled from that because it's important so much for the survival of the state. We should stop playing this dual use. We should either do the transfer to military rail or on simplifying legislation that in the conditions of the market economy, it would be a simplified process for licensing, for the production of single-use weapons, and for the production of intelligence, warfare intelligence, and using, they could announce that shaheds could be taken down, but no mechanisms written down. Okay, we can teach people, but even to get this means, they simply don't have the right, because they don't have the right to work with this military means, because these are civilians. So we are responding to some cases without proper planning, without any strategic approach, and that's where I would want that we would talk not to financial guys, but with economists. In the first place, how we should change the legislation that in the conditions of the limited financing, we would get the maximum effect out of this. Thank you, Lyubov. And for the minutes, although it doesn't sound really good, that we also turn to the vertical Ministry of Defense. From all of them, we received the same reply from them. Let's omit it this time. And I really have some wish that with the new Minister of Defense, things will be moving. You're the person who is very systematic, and I really hope that you will be able to bring this
транслювати
We
далі
will
через наші
also
канали. Зараз,
translate it
якщо, я
and
сподіваюся, в тебе
transmit
є
it via
час,
our
ти залишишся
channels.
далі і
In case you have some time,
після того, як виступлять представники асоціації, можливо, ти ще теж додаш щодо
after the representatives of the
своїх
association
моментів.
will take the floor, you will add your comments. I will also add about the work of the funds. The funds are spending less money on the procurement, but more on advocation of these changes and on preparation, because the preparation is this is something that and we are also using money for the modernization of the equipment, because in the conditions of the market economy, the state is too slow for the war. Even though something is bought within 3 months, this is too slow. The technologies are changing, so the majority of the military funds with the partners with whom we are working, they're spending money on modernization, what has been purchased by the state.
Дякую, Любо.
Thank you, Luba.
Зараз прошу до слова
And now I
Анну
would like to ask the floor Anna Zarudna,
Технологічні сили України.
the technological forces of Ukraine.
Всіх трьох асоціацій в мене,
To
по
these
суті,
three associations,
ті
I
самі
have in
питання.
essence the same
По-перше,
questions.
загальна картина,
First of all, the
якими
general
темпами
picture,
взагалі
in which
зростають обсяги
pace
виробництва в
the
членів
volumes of productions are
двох
growing
асоціацій,
with
як
the members of
змінюється
the
відсоток вільних
associations,
потужностей,
how
бо ми,
the
власне, від
percentage of the
Fiscal
free capacity is changing,
чули в
because we
публічному
heard
просторі, що,
also
власне,
in the public
станом
domain that as
на
of
останній момент, коли це говорилося, якщо не помиляюся, це десь початок року був, лише третина потужностей була
because
завантажена.
only third
І,
of
власне, як
capacities was
змінюється
loaded,
кількість зайнятих та
and
зарплати, і
how
чи, власне,
the
вони
number
можуть
of
наростити ще
employed and
виробництво
the
продукції,
amount of
на
wages, how do they
яку є
change?
запит на
They
фронті і за
could
яких
also
умов. Отже, Анно,
change
прошу вас
how they could change.
першою. Я
So
так
Anna, please,
розумію,
you're the first.
технологічні сили України більшою мірою, власне, об'єднують ті підприємства, які виробляють
These companies, how did they unite the ones who are producing high precision weapons? Thank you so much for the invitation to come over. In case we talk about the producers, they're working in two dimensions. That's internal Ukrainian dimension, and there is a huge dimension of the external market, which is very active. Also active because what is happening on the Ukrainian market and inside the country. The producers are now mostly working for them internal orders, finance from the state budget, and this is the main manifestation and the funds and the problematic issues because the state resources are limited. It's very clear because of huge expenditures on war and social support. There has been a growth in the amount of orders, and the state does it all in order to cover and to provide contracting from the state budget. But we also see that the budget put in for the 2024 could not cover all the necessary amounts. Last week, the parliament made a decision and increased expenditures directly amid the mid of the year, and that all says that the Ukrainian producer is very difficult to be financed by 100% from the state budget, and that asks a big question from the point of view where we should take the turnover money in order to promote these technologies and those important technologies that Luba has talked about, and the ones that are so important for the defense situation in the country. We all know that because of some security limitations, the Ukrainian producers have minimum capacity and possibility to go to the external market. Export is not officially closed. There is no legal ban, but it's a political decision. And of course, technological forces are shouting about this problem, and in such a way they're trying to help producers to find these funds that could to be covering R&D and part of the development. Absence of export, it takes away access from the foreign currency arrivals, and this is absolutely not acceptable in terms of the classical approaches to business and entrepreneurial activity, but it really puts certain limitations to such a possibility to grow for companies and to develop. In case we talk about the defense orders and contracts, the situation is somewhat improving, also at the expense of, so in case we talk about the internal market, at the expense that the big procurement agency receives additional options and possibility for the procurement, for some direct procurement. Also, there is a system which is called the military line of drones, where they can buy directly by the units and brigades. And also there is a big pot of funds that is coming to us from external international partners. And basically this is all together gives us the possibility for producers to make contracts, to make orders, and to supply for their army. Also, to a great extent, there is a huge role of charitable foundations who are procuring and supplying. Unfortunately, that still remains a quick way to procure and to supply for the military certain types of ammunition, and the military are using this, but it's not possible to say that nothing is moving in the better direction. Still, there is quite a lot of challenge in this respect. In case we talk about the figures and about growth, exactly what we have public, which is not classified since 2022, the growth is there. And in case we talk about 22, it was 1 billion of growth. In 2023, it was from 3 billion. And now the last figure, which was called about 2024, this was around 10 billion growth. And exactly from the sources and from what the president is saying, the investment into the defense sector are $43 billion. And that's a sustainable figure that everybody keeps in mind. In terms of the factual capacity of our producers who are members of the association, then truly we presented, and it's quite actual, the figures of weapons, where we counted, and together with manufacturers, we presented the figure, how much they could produce of the weapons in case the state would contract them by 100%. We're still talking that this is around 40% of the general capacity. We will soon publish a new research that will show new figures in terms of the bigger number of economic indicators. We are now preparing for the end of August a big forum about international possibilities that Ukraine has about joint productions, and that's where, together with the other team, we will present this research. We will share it with everybody. We have also some figures that are impressive, and in terms of the arms meter, we will show you. So the indicators slightly went up, but it's not like significant difference. Nothing has changed significantly. In case we talk about expenditures and about the state budget, and we're coming back to this, everybody knew the figure that in 2025 Ukraine planned to use 31% of its GDP to, once again, coming back to the decisions of the parliament, and the decisions about the state budget are revisited in terms of the increase, and that is directly impacting the process of contracting and procurement of weapons. In case we talk about the pace of growth of employment, then the defense sector really gives this huge indicator of economic improvement. That's on average 200% of industrial volumes. In terms, we talk about the staff potential and about the wages. Unfortunately, this information is sensitive and it's not available. Between the companies, there is certain competition and fight for best brains and for the employees, best employees. But in reality, the state is doing certain steps in order to propose to private producers to increase the number of staff and to engage as many people as possible to their companies. Now, in the parliament, we have registered the draft law that will allow to reserve those categories of persons who are not on record. They have certain problems with the possibility to be reserved from conscription, and our manufacturers believe that this will be a big step forward, and we expect that this draft law will be adopted in the parliament. Also, when we talk about financing and loans, apart from the programs that Andriy has mentioned, the Ministry of Strategic Industry, which is luckily it's not any there, it's one big Ministry of Defense. They launched the lending program. It definitely doesn't make sense to somehow depreciate or to say that it's not working. Of course, lending does work, but whether it works in the full extent, whether all 100% of applications are satisfied and the activity of producers, well, no, but it was promised that the Ministry of Defense will continue to work in this direction. But once again, this is all the question where to take money from to these loans and basically the access of producers to this lending. That's why it's also an open actual issue, and in here we have some big expectation for the updated Ministry of Economy and updated Ministry of Defense that will be working very actively about this, and we are quite open to make sure we can work up a certain agenda together with the ministry related to access to these finances. There are lots of ideas. That's why we are definitely open and we are sure to help with this. In case we talk about the potential of scaling up, then in reality, what we have shown the official figure, once we have the research, we asked about it in the context of joint venture companies and possibilities in terms of SAFE and also in the program of joint defense companies that are actively developing. In reality, in case we don't go into these figures, but just to talk about some average that was talked about, it's 30-50% between 6-9 months. This is an absolutely fine indicator and the possibilities that the producers can now increase and can grow their volumes. Also, now we have a very interesting tendency about the volumes, and you can trace that via the system of tender procurement. Also, there, the producers can submit their offers to tenders. It also shows how capable they are and how they can close various contracts for various products. So basically, some differentiation of orders and possibilities to make sure that apart from to provide for the army and to provide for the production, strengthen its production and grow the production, we have the basis for that. In case we talk about most important key provisions that will help the producers, that's 100% long-term contracts. Basically, Lyuba said before about strategizing of some foreseeability. That's what we call the foreseeability and long-term approach. We understand that it's not so far transparent for the producer what kind of needs and how it is formed. It is a protected system that takes away the important information, which means that the manufacturers can't plan for more than half a year ahead, and they will not invest in certain technologies, and that's why they are lagging behind from what is happening technologically at the front. That's why we are advocating the question of long-term contracts and the question of, either of the bigger engagement of manufacturers to the issue of formulating needs, or to make it in such a way in order to communicate, to make post-communication with manufacturers so they can be together with the army, with the state, so they can know what is expecting of them. If we talk about the regulatory policy, then in reality now there is certain progress in terms of certain legislation about exports and about preferential conditions for the defense industry. In the public field, it's called Project Diia.City. The president calls it Build with Ukraine. This is some preferential conditions, tax benefits that will allow companies, I don't want to say 100%, because voting should be in the parliament, in here to keep some colleagues to your colleagues. I would like to ask Valentyna Vedrovska to talk about this Diia.City, because as far as we understand from our previous communications, the Parliament has actively contributed to the development of this legal regime. So in case you don't mind, I will pass the floor to Valentyna, then allow me to close and we'll pass the floor. We actively work with the committees and the majority proposals were taken into account, and our manufacturers are supporting these projects, Safe, Built with Ukraine, and Diia.City. They put additional hopes, additional vision where they take money from. Unfortunately, not all funds can be invested into R&D, but at least providing and contracting the existing production lines, definitely this can be provided, and that's why this is something that we also talked about. We will be talking about the joint companies and about these possibilities, about SAFE program in more detail. That's why around this we are open and we keep in contact with all state authorities. Thank you, Anna. Valentyna, now the question to you. Something that I would clarify. I would like to ask you to comment it in more detail. This is the project about Defense City. What can it significantly change in the economy of the defense producers? And one more question of my deputy, Maria Ritko, in Q&A, also very interesting. It is addressed to the business associations and also to Lyubov from Dignitas. How do you evaluate the model of procurement when brigades have their own budget for ammunition of their choice? Is this more effective versus the centralized procurement via the Ministry of Defense? Maybe you have a comment, but let's start from the Defense City. That's the question also from Maria, and maybe something else important from the dynamics of your members of association. What is different and what is additional to what Anna has said? Please. Thank you. Good afternoon. In the first place, being here, listening to other presenters, on the one hand, I'm as a veteran, I can tell you from this side, as well as the representative of business, there are also some comments from the state. So let's go one by one. In the first place, when I was at the front and I'm working on drones, and I always would have a question to producers, why you can't put a different camera? Why you don't put a battery? This is so quickly to be changed. When I started to work now in the sector of defense with the producers, and I have one single question, how do you manage in these conditions to work so nicely? So in reality, what was said by my colleagues, this is true. The producers are put into this inconvenient conditions because the defense sector is only one that is so limited from the point of view that the state is the single procurement. So the state as the monopolist is dictating rules, dictating prices. They're the only one who can buy something. And since we have limited export capacity, it's artificially closed. So the employees don't have any other way out, and they have to move inside. And what we said in the beginning, that the funds are put into defense sector, this is not proper because the majority of weapons is put into the procurement of weapons and various devices. But when we talk about the development, it's actually absent. We now don't have the mechanisms to buy one or the other R&D, a certain technical solution. But we are working with the Ministry of Defense, and that's what we said, that we should have some planning of procurement well in advance. Of course, the producer would want to do this. They would be very happy to do this. The manufacturer says, tell me what you need, we will do this, but tell me that you will buy it later. So, a few months ago, there was a process launched of creating some mechanism of forward contracts, the so-called forward contracts. So we're talking to them, communicating to them, we're giving them comments or proposals. There were some meetings with the producers, and we believe that next year this mechanism will launch when the military will be formulating requests. When they see that they need something, the producers will be, with the competition basis, they will formulate certain solutions, and the Ministry of Defense will be buying these solutions, their development. This is one of the mechanisms that should help in the development and the procurement of something that is really necessary. Also, one of such instruments for the development of producers could be the defense city. Now, the colleagues said that it's earlier to talk about some final results because we are only expecting voting, but I can tell you everything is changing every 5 minutes. So on Tuesday, we had the meeting of the committee where the specialized committee supported the amendments to the second reading, while we found out about them only in the evening before that, so we can't forecast what it will be. But what is expected as of now is the creation of the special legal regime where the manufacturers that fit certain criteria in order to get into this regime. And this criteria, it's important that we are heard. So the proposals were such in order to lower these requirements to enter this legal mode. So they would listen to us. So as of now, the manufacturers should have 75% of their income for the production of weapons, special machinery, shells, and ammunition. In the previous edition, it was purely defense goods. Now they have made it in more detailed and they have expanded it. So this could be drones, it could be on-land robotized complexes, the types of shells. That expands the list of possible enterprises that can enter this list. Of course, some are maybe providing communications means, but they don't fit, they're not eligible for this criteria. That's very important that this new legal regime that also foresees some taxation benefits, it should start from the next year. Correspondingly, we suspect that it's difficult to understand how it will affect the economy because the huge number of producers are producing not only these goods, because as the Deputy Minister of Economy said, the manufacturers are also producing something that they are buying. They can also produce other means to work not only in defense sector, and that is something that should be counted in the 75%. So we can foresee that the first year of entering this legal regime, not all the manufacturers will be able to get in there. Why? Because this year they have not fulfilled the 75% rule. But once again, we can foresee that in 2026 they will readjust themselves. Maybe if they can create two companies, one will be doing civil orders, the other one military orders, or otherwise, in order to be eligible for the criteria to enter this special legal regime. And why I said in the beginning about the development, because this is the only working mechanism from the point of view of the state to stimulate the development, because in case the manufacturer enters this legal regime and wants to receive tax benefits in terms of not paying the PAT, they are obliged their whole income, profit to reinvest. Procurement of some licenses, machinery, stimulating its military production and its production capacity. And correspondingly, we can understand that these are millions. So this manufacturer will use millions into their development. There could be also manufacturers who will come to this military special mode, this legal regime. In case they want to receive profit, then they will get out of it. It's about the defense city, because we actually spent days and nights working on it. I would also like to comment the previous speakers. In case you have some questions, please ask. Somehow, this is also very interesting, in particular, the stimuli from Defense City, because even now, we have around 300,000 people working in the companies that one way or the other pertain to the defense sector. So they are working for the defense. Why I'm carefully selecting words? Because in reality, we don't have this definition. What is the company of defense sector? It is somewhat not clear. Some normative acts are there. That's why we're trying to come up with this some definition how we should call this company, because as I said before, very often not with the industry codes, we can't identify these companies. No, some that have the criticality status, they are considered like this when they fulfill defense orders. So for these types of companies, some 300,000 employees are employed. In our association, and there was also the League of Defense Companies, they also, the member of our association, actually we have the association of the robotized complexes, of drones, of intelligence, electronic fair. I may have forgotten somebody else. So all of these producers with whom we are communicating, the majority of them, they were created yesterday. So the startup can cost millions today. So quickly they are developing. That's why we have these benefits and these bonuses. In case if we add the comment, but once again, I'm as if I'm at the side of the manufacturers because I'm rooting for them and I'm working for their interests. But we always have to remember that what I can produce, not necessarily something that is so much needed. So we can calculate the capacity, and our manufacturers do produce necessary goods, but they don't have money. They can say that we can do as much, but we can't do more. But honestly, there are some goods which are not necessarily on the market. When I was at the front, they would bring us something and we said, thank you, we don't need this. So the possibility to buy something, yes, that's a good decision for the military to choose themselves, because we're talking about the drones. They are at the peak of their development in Ukraine. In case we talk about drones, one product at a certain frontline can work ideally. At another frontline segment, it may not work at all. So in the case the Ministry of Defense is buying it centralized and it gives it to everybody, somewhere it works, somewhere not. It will be simply brought and they will say, have it, but it will not go up in the air. So that's why in case the military would have their own choice, that's always good. But the only thing that we are trying to see such a challenge of the procurement itself for the military units. They don't have any procurement professionals within the military unit, and very often they have some problems in filling out all the documents in doing this procurement. But this question is resolved. Also, very rapid development for the production. In case we talk about the on-land robotized complexes, the demand has grown so sharply, and the offer also is growing, so they need money in order to increase their capacities, hire new people, give new jobs. And this, coming back to the defense city, it has one other positive aspect in a way that it will also propose relocation in terms safer territories. This relocation will be with the support. Okay, what kind of support we will discuss, but nevertheless, the central authorities, local authorities have to contribute to this manufacturer. It's not yet resolved and not approved, but this idea will be in the budget code. We'll work on this so that the Hromada, whose company is located with them, so they would receive this PIT tax. Correspondingly, this is, in my opinion, that's a great development. That's not only that just produce it and maybe we'll buy it. But now finally we have planning culture, make orders in front, well ahead, and also to contribute to companies. Thank you, Valentyna, and let's finish with some blitz with 3 association representatives. Nataliya Mykolska, who is a guru working with the state and for the state. Natalia, what is this very specific interest that you see in the defense sector and in dual-use goods in Diia.City United, something that the majority perceives as the association of IT businesses? So how do you see in your members, how do you see the dynamics of the defense production in Ukraine? Thank you, Hlib. Thank you, colleagues, for the very interesting research and conversation. In the first place, Diia.City United is the association of the product technological business. I want us to go away from IT. We had IT when we had the service business of outsourcing. Now we are technological business. The production of drones, the production of drones, which are deep strikers. This is a technologically high-tech production, machine building. Let's put it this way. And it all depends how you see it. Is this machine building or is this technological hardware business? That's why our association combines product and technological companies. And among the participants of our association, there are lots of producers who are doing defense technologies, both at the level of software as well as the hardware. That's why we have this interest, which is not theoretical, but quite practical, rather. Correspondingly, we are considering this as the technological business that now fulfills a super important, unrealistically good function of the state. But we, as the association, we believe that this business is the future of Ukrainian economy, both of what we have now and during the post-war recovery. We believe that this opinion is confirmed not only by us, but it's also confirmed by the latest announcements at URC. Everybody was clear at the Ukrainian Recovery Conference that the sector of defense and security sector will be the drivers of the Ukrainian economy. That's the first important statement. The second important statement, we are still considering this as business, and partially I would agree with what Andriy has said, and partially I would agree with what Lyubov said, but I don't agree with everything. First and most important, now, in the time when we have active hostilities and the war, the state should play a very important role in being a consumer from this business. In the whole world, in the sector of defense technologies, the biggest consumer is the state, or some associations as NATO, via their defense budgets. But in the rest, in the world, there is a huge number of these companies. These are private companies who build their business as private business. The state, because it's a specific type of business connected with security, it controls them. The state has the right to limit investments, not only in Ukraine, this is elsewhere in the world. We have cases when in the US and in Europe, there was limited investment into less important sectors, where investors from certain countries were not allowed to enter and to buy out these companies. The state can limit export or control it, and the state has the right to control and regulate internally. So we can see that this is the future business. This is the business which is quite high, that is able to engage big investment, foreign investment from friendly countries. And then here the state of our country is to define those countries who are our partners, from which we can engage these investments, and with the ones with whom we can jointly develop joint companies and joint projects. Now, an important issue. I 100% agree with what Lyubov said, that we need to, as much as possible, simplify the regulation for this sector. Regulation kills innovation, especially of the new and small startups. Big companies that have already, where they already have state orders, they already know how to work with legislation. We now need the necessity to simplify and to weaken the pressure wherever possible, so we can have more and more ideas will be transformed into products. Because our biggest problem is that we have lots of ideas, they're being tested, but they are not transported into the serious production and into the product because they are slowly, while they are transforming from the idea to product, they already become less necessary because our enemy is not sleeping. They're also investing money into the development of technologies. So simplification is very important. The second important aspect, opening up exports. We, from our side, we also insist on gradual controlled opening of exports so that in the first place, the partner countries that can be defined by the state, not only that it would give the possibility to receive turnover money, although that is also important, but to make sure that our companies would be having a stimulus to build their products and productions in accordance to standards, global standards that we have. Yes, we have certain certification, but we really understand well that the standards of procurement of weapons and machinery, the standards are much higher in NATO countries, and that's a lengthy and expensive process to go through this standardization. And that's where I return to the topic of investments. Why we need partners and investors also from the NATO countries to make sure that they are our guides in all these procedures and the possibilities of receiving defense orders in the countries participants of NATO, because they understand how it is all happening, and they, apart from finances and apart from capital, they will also bring in their know-how, knowledge, potential technologies and connections in these countries. That's why we believe that apart from the conversation on the turnover money, we should talk about capexes, because for the growth of companies from the small producers into real high-tech companies, they need capexes and they need investments. Look at the examples of the Ukrainian hardware companies, such as Ajax. Ajax had the biggest growth at the moment when they had the institutional investor Horizon Capital entered them. Also, same with other companies who are basically growing now. So that's very important that everything that we would do, we would keep it in mind and we would think about engaging investment, both Ukrainian, because in Ukraine we would also need to engage local investors and create conditions so they would come in with grivna that we have in Ukraine into the defense startups and defense companies, also to engage a foreign investor. Now a comment about Defense.City. Look, I'm not wearing any orange glasses or rosy glasses. Defense.City, it's a list of companies. Let's be objective about it. Next, the second important element. The person who is working with Diia.City United for 1.5 years, in reality, that's quite a complicated legal and taxation regime that is still being crystallized. Within Defense.City, we submitted our comments, we submitted amendments to the draft law. We are looking at what is in the second reading. There are lots of questions, lots of issues that may not work as the necessary. And the second is that the authors of the draft law foresee that the companies who are now the producers of drones within Diia.City, they should move to Defense.City, and they should not have the possibility not to use taxation benefits. You can't sit on two chairs and use both tax benefits of one regime and the other. So you either use the general system of taxation or a special system. But other benefits and benefits that are given by this regime, they should be used, should be applied for producers who work in this sector, but have chosen a different mode for taxation. That's very important. We submitted our amendments about closing registers and the like. So we believe that the Parliamentaries are somewhat in a hurry. They don't want to come into long discussions in order to work on this regime. And we are very much concerned that the law adopted too quickly, it will not work. For instance, in the issue related to relocation, the funds are foreseen, but the mechanism it's not there yet, because there will be no money on relocation. This is just one simple example of how we are moving. So we are for having a mandatory support for companies that work in this sector, because for us, you said it correctly, this is probably the only strategic sector on which all of us should be working. The second important aspect, we want this support to be effective. We don't want to just put a tick mark. It should work, not mediocre. It should be really working. Number three, we want that these regimes that are already working, because Diia.City is already working, and a lot of technological companies have chosen it. They had the possibility to use and how it works in the defense city. Also, very important, the last point for me, that all of this conversation, we should not forget about international investments, about joint venture companies for production, and most likely the engagement of the institutional capital. The European Investment Bank has announced, the European Commission has announced about creation of the fund for private equity investment in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it's about dual use. And Lyubov said it correctly, that let's not cover ourselves up with this. We now need investments into defense technologies. We need the change in the approach of IFI investors. They should enter financing the defense and the change of the approach of our partner countries, because DFC, the American corporation, the foundation that is doing investment and insurance, historically, they didn't work with defense. So maybe it's not a fact that this fund will support American investment into the Ukrainian defense. In the same way, same developments in organizations of Great Britain, who is our close partner, Scandinavian countries, and the like. We only have some single cases when sovereign funds, we have some cases when sovereign funds have become LPs into venture funds who are investing into defense tech in Ukraine. But these are single cases. I believe here we are all together. We can start to transmit the message that we need these institutional funds in order to open up private investments. Because what does the institutional investor? They do due diligence, they do compliance checks, and they are sharing risks of this investment with you into this sector. That's why, in case we would have more institutional investors who would invest into the Ukrainian defense and defense technologies, most likely not directly, but via private equity or via venture funds, we would have much quicker movement for all the situation. That's why we, as the association, we did this defense workshop at URC. The objective was to start the dialogue with the institutional investors about the change of the approach to financing the defense sector in Ukraine. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for adding this element of investment and the impact on the development of the sector, of the economy in general. Valentyna, I see your hand, but I really don't want to start the defense city, because this is just one of the instruments. I would rather, since we are out of time already, I just wanted, let's, if possible, because these are the things that could be discussed between associations in the working order. I would rather like for the last comment to ask Lyubov, in case Lyubov has the response to what colleagues said from the business, also about this procurement by brigades. In case you believe that it is important, I would rather like to ask you with this beautiful Ukrainian landscape. Hopefully, you're in the peaceful territory to give your comments. Let me comment about the procurement of technologies and machinery by brigades. I think this was a correct comment. I think from Nataliya that the procurers are really of different preparation in different units. That's why this option should also be available, but it should not be the only option, especially units who have seen huge losses and which often then don't have full management and their vacancies are not filled. In case we put procurement on them, they may simply crash down. So it should be an option of the centralized capacity by the Ministry of Defense, but also there should be capacity for the units themselves to buy it, and moreover to give the possibility to add the possibility to buy uncodified equipment, because there is a huge number of goods that are necessary for the military that are not eligible for the codification requirements. There is a huge range of various cables, antennas, which can't be codified, but they're necessary. So this question is resolved now by some general money, some charitable foundations. That's why it's definitely need to have the simplification, not only for the manufacturers, but also simplification for the military units from the point of view what they can procure, using which mechanisms, and correspondingly what they can put on their accounting, what they can write off, because in many units they still have some drones that were destroyed in 2022, but they're still in their accounting and they don't have the possibility to write them off. In terms of exports, I would totally agree with Nataliya that there should be a controlled export. It's important not to open up the gates, so it's up the controlled export, and the state should decide which technologies should be provided to which countries. That's absolutely normal. That works in the United States through the ITAR licenses. We know, for instance, we want to buy missiles for Patriots, and the manufacturer is ready to sell it. But the United States, as a country, they regulate if it can be sold, in which quantity. So it has to be allowed, but it has to be allowed by the state as the controlled mechanism. It's important to say that not all manufacturers have good intentions. Some are quite different, and in Ukraine there's been done a huge number of benefits, the taxation, the customs benefits to bring in components. So in case these benefits are used to export weapons and to simply have financial advantages at other markets, this is not going to be fair from the state to our military who are not fully provided with weapons. Did you have any other questions? No, I think you have covered it all. And what's important from your point of view, also you have said, I would like to thank everybody. Thank you, Lyubov, because you were able to join us during your trip and to represent the viewpoint from almost from the battlefield, for whom this is necessary from in the first place. So this impact on economy is like very important for us as officers. Also as citizens, definitely we need to understand that it's working all well for the protection of the country. I would like to thank all the participants who have joined the discussion and the colleagues who have prepared their presentations, and of course everybody who has been listening to us. Please join us in September to our next discussion. I would like to wish to everybody a peaceful evening, hopefully night, and successful completion of the week. All the best.